Hello everyone, welcome back. So it's been a while that I've made a video, so let's just get started. Now we're going to go on to a new topic, and this is called properties of geometrical figures. In other words, plane geometry. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some quick properties of angles to start off, and I think some of you may already know this, but I'll just go through it anyway. So we're going to do 301, and which is deductive reasoning in numerical exercises. So just remember, for the topic of geometry, there's going to be a lot of reasoning. So this is going to be a lot of words that you write in mathematics, and this is going to be the most wordy part of math you'll ever come across. So let's get started. I'm just going to go straight into it. So what are adjacent angles? So, well, adjacent angles are two angles right next to each other, right? They don't have to add up to 90 degrees. So if I have an angle like this, say this is ABC, D. So the ABD is this dot over here, and DBC is this thing over there. These two angles are adjacent because they're right next to each other. That's what adjacent means. Now, if two adjacent angles add up to 90 degrees, then it forms a right angle, right? Complementary angles are also adjacent. So complementary basically means two angles that add up to 90 degrees. It's just a fancy word for two angles that add up to 90 degrees. And supplementary angles is basically a fancy word that says two angles add up to 180 degrees. So how I remember is this. Complementary, 90 degrees. Supplementary, 180 degrees. And C comes before S, so 90 comes before 180, right? Alright, next one, vertically opposite angles. So when two straight lines cross, you can see the two straight lines. Two pairs of vertically opposite angles are formed. So in other words, this angle, the two dots, they are vertically opposite. And the two curves here, these two angles, they're also vertically opposite. And it's important to know that vertically opposite angles are equal. You don't need to know why, but they just are. Corresponding angles. If a transversal cuts two parallel lines, transversal is basically a fancy word for that kind of vertical, the ish line there, cuts two parallel lines, then corresponding angles are formed. Corresponding angles are equal. Okay, so now corresponding in relation to corresponding angles, this angle and this angle are corresponding. Okay, now corresponding angles are only equal if the two lines are parallel. So if the two lines are parallel, then this angle and this angle are parallel. So you can think of are equal. You can think of corresponding angles as like an angle that looks like an F. Now these two angles are corresponding angles, but they're not equal, and the reason is because these two lines are not parallel. So these two angles are corresponding and equal. These two angles are corresponding and equal because they're on parallel lines. These two angles are also corresponding, and so are these two the angles, right? So just remember, these angles are just called corresponding angles. Just you can just think of an F. Okay, so these two angles are corresponding. These are, and these are. All right. What's the next one? All right, alternate angles. So think of alternate angles as angles that look like a Z. So if you have two straight lines, and say they're parallel, these two angles are alternate. Okay, so think of a Z. These two angles are also alternate. So alternate angles are also equal when the lines are parallel. So, okay. Next one, co-interior angles. Co-interior, the angles are basically, you can think of it looks like a C. Okay, so these two angles, these are co-interior, and when on parallel lines. When it's on a parallel line, these angles, they add up to 90 degrees. They add up to 180 degrees. If a transversal cuts two parallel lines, then co-interior angles are formed. Co-interior angles are supplementary. So when they say supplementary, they mean they add up to 180 degrees. It's a fancy word. Next one, angle sum of a triangle. Now, this is something I expect you to know. This should not be new thing. This should not be something new for you. Angle sum of a triangle is 180 degrees. Isosceles triangles, well, isosceles triangles are basically triangles where they have two sides that are equal and two equal angles. Right? They also have one axis of symmetry. What that means is if I draw a vertical line like this, it'll cut the triangle into two triangles that are identical. That's what that means. Equilateral triangles, 3 equal sides, 3 equal angles, and 3 axes of symmetry. I don't need to go through that. Exterior angle of a triangle. Okay, so this is something that may be new for some of you. The exterior angle of a triangle is equal to the sum of the two interior angles. So what that means is this. So if I have a triangle and I have a line that looks like this. So say if this is, I don't know, 30 degrees and this is, say, 40 degrees. Well, actually, probably not 40, just make it look a little bit more realistic. Say 80 degrees. What that means is this angle is going to be 110 degrees. Because this is the exterior angle of the triangle, and this angle equals to these two angles added up. Right, so I hope that's clear. Angle sum of a quadrilateral. So angle sum of a quadrilateral is 360 degrees. You should know this. Okay, so in the following exercises, you'll be asked to find the sides of unknown sides and angles and to give a reason for each statement you make. Use the correct terminology. Reasons are usually abbreviated, but take note not to abbreviate them to such an extent that the meaning is lost. Okay, so in the questions that I'm going to go through now, it will require some kind of reasoning. So let's just get started. Now, I expect you to know most of these already. So now I don't actually recommend writing these initials. Okay, I'll only tell you the ones that you can write. So triangle, this one you can write. Congruent to, you can write this one. Similar to, you can write this. Parallel, you can. But for everything else, I wouldn't recommend it. All right, so let's just look at 3018. Exercise using parallel lines. So for this question, it says EF, so that line means parallel. EF is parallel to GH. Find the size of angle GCD. So GCD is that angle there. Give reasons. Okay. So I'm just going to copy this question down and I'll show you how I would do this question, because I would not recommend writing initials like how in the textbook does. So, oops. All right. Let's take a look. So it says find the size of angle GCD giving reasons. So we're trying to work out what this angle is. So in order to do that, we first kind of we can work out what this angle is, right? So this will be your step 1, and that's called your corresponding angles. In step 2, you would work it out through vertically opposite angles, right? So once you've established the steps, that's when you can write down your solution. So we can say that angle BCH is equal to what? 76 degrees. And what's the reason? Well, remember, these are corresponding angles, right? So corresponding angles. Now, one thing you have to be really careful of, every time you write corresponding angles, you need to write parallel lines, because corresponding angles do not have to be equal. So then what I'll write is corresponding angles EF, so the line EF is parallel to GH. You definitely need to write the EF parallel to GH part. Very important. Alright, so once you've found out this angle, then you can work out angle GCD, right? Angle GCD is equal to 76 degrees. And what's the reason? Well, the vertically opposite angles, right? So then you say vertically opposite angles. So that's how you would do a question like this. So you need to basically, what I recommend is write out the steps first, and then you start writing the reasoning. So step 1, you find out what angle BCH is, 76 degrees, provide a reason. Next step, provide another reason. Now in the textbook, they've done it in a different way, which is essentially the same thing. What they did is they found out angle EBC first by vertically opposite angles, and then they found angle GCD using corresponding angles, which is the same thing. All right, let me go through another example. Now, I'll go through one where the answer is not right in front of you, just to make it more interesting. So let's just take a look at question 3a. Okay, so I'm going to copy this question. So I'll make it a bit bigger. All right. So how would we do this? Now, it says find the value of x in each diagram, give reasons. So we need to work out x, and how are we going to do that? So first of all, what we can do is we can find out what this angle is, right? How do we find out what this angle is? Well, remember, co-interior angles. These two angles are co-interior. In other words, they add up to 180 degrees. And the second step, you can just work out the angle from here using corresponding angles, right? Okay, so then what I would do is this. Angle DCB is equal to 180 take away 82 degrees. And the reason is what? Co-interior angles. And when you write co-interior angles, complementary or corresponding, so you need to say AB is parallel to DC. So then that's equal to what? That's equal to 98, right? And you don't need to give a reason for this, for just simplifying that, all right? Now then you can say angle CEF is equal to 98 degrees. And what's the reason? Well, corresponding angles. And the reason is what? Now, for this one, the parallel lines is referring to BC and the FG, right? So make sure even when you write the parallel lines part, you need to specify the relevant parallel lines. So if you wrote AB parallel to DC here, that would be incorrect. You have to say BC is parallel to FG, because those are the parallel lines that form the corresponding angles. All right, and the question asks you for x, so you can just say therefore x is equal to 98 degrees because angle CEF, that is x, right? And that would be done. All right, I'll go through another question just to make it more clear. I'll do question F. So question F. So question F is a little bit tricky. Now, how would we do this question? Okay, so this is how I would do it. The reason I know how to do it is because I've seen a question like this in the past. What you can do is you can draw a line here. Okay, draw a line, and what you can do is label a new point. So you can say this is D. So D. Can label this point D, and this is also parallel to AB and DE. Okay, so what you can do is this: you can find out what this angle is using what? Co-interior, the angles with CAB, and you can find out what this angle is using co-interior angles with CDE, and then you can add these two angles up to get X, right? So let's get started. So once you draw the D in the diagram, so you can just say angle ACD is equal to 180 take away 40. Sorry, 180 take away 140. And the reason is co-interior angles. You need to write the parallel lines. So AB parallel to CD. And this equals to 40 degrees. You don't need a reason for that. Now the next step is you can say angle DCE. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't have used D here because D was already taken. I'm just going to put, let's say A, B, C, D, E, the F. This can be F. So then in this question, it should be ACF. So then that would be, the DCF would be equal to 180 degrees take away 128 degrees. And this gives you what? 52 degrees. Right? And the reason is the same. Co-interior angles. Oops. And the reason is CF parallel to DE, right? Okay, so now you've worked out what angle ACF and angle DCF is. Then you can say angle ACD is equal to 40 plus 52. And the reason for this, the reason for this is called adjacent angles. Because remember, adjacent angles are just angles right next to each other. and this equals to 92 degrees. So then you can say, therefore, x is equal to 92 degrees. Alright, so hopefully that covers enough examples for you to get an idea of how to answer these questions. So remember, when you answer these questions, you need to make sure you write the steps out first. So that's what I recommend based on my experience. Once you write out the steps, then you can write out the reasons, like this. And remember, you should always write parallel, the two sides that are parallel, when you give reasons like co-interior angles, corresponding angles, or alternate angles. Okay, so that should be all for today. Time for you to do the exercise.